because of what was happening at the border with the separation of families. So I just wanted to say this. When we were here last time, the major issue was the separation of families, and we visited with fathers inside who had their daughters or sons, mostly daughters, that were separated when they came over the border, and they had no communications with them. They didn't even know where they were. We've tried to rectify that problem. I'm not saying that it has been completely rectified, but today was a little different. Today we came mainly to find out the stories of the people and what they were doing here and what their ability was to seek political asylum. And I wanted to thank all of you who are here protesting or whatever you call what you're doing, because the problem is really political, right? In other words, we have a Trump administration that is doing whatever they can. Wait till that goes over. That is doing whatever they can to prevent people, in my opinion, who have legitimate reasons for coming here, from coming. And, I could talk about the family separation and the problems with that. I'm not suggesting that that's not continue to be a problem. But what I saw today here, because this is an adult facility, mostly men and women, there are no children or families here. But what we heard today that I think is the most significant, in my opinion, is that this process where the Trump administration is trying to prevent people from seeking political asylum is having a terrible impact. Because what I saw, somebody had like the Statue of Liberty thing on him over here somewhere. When I looked at that, I mean, look, that's what this country is based on. People came here because they were being persecuted, starting with the Mayflower, right, for religious reasons. And we saw that today. We saw almost everyone, as Congressman Meek said, who was trying to make their case for political asylum, and in my opinion, having a very difficult time to do that, either because of language barriers or because they didn't understand the law. Now, they said that they have lawyers that they can see, but it was very obvious to me that most of the people that we talked to today, I think, had a legitimate case for political asylum, but I have serious doubts that that case will ever be heard in a fair way, because they don't have the preparation, or they have the language barrier, or they don't have the documents, and they don't have much help in making their case. And the reasons, there were some women who, their husbands were victims of domestic violence. There were other people who were being discriminated against or persecuted because of their religion. And this wasn't just from, one country. I talked to a guy who was from Kazakhstan, and another one from Georgia, former Soviet republics, where the authorities there, a lot of them are still like, what do they call KGB or something, were persecuting them, and they were trying to make the case, and one had already been denied. So I think the biggest way that you can help us, and the biggest thing that I take back from today, is we have to stop the Trump administration from changing the law by regulation, by rule, or just by pressure, from preventing people from coming here who are being persecuted. That is not right. That is un-American. And the ICE authorities kept saying, well, the law hasn't changed. Well, maybe the statutory law hasn't changed, but Trump is appointing, administration is appointing the immigration judges. They're issuing all kinds of executive orders and policy decisions, in my opinion, that are making it virtually impossible for people to seek political asylum. And that is my biggest takeaway from today, that has to end. We will
Nobody has said anything about the treatment of people. You saw it.
Well, I have to say, I can't comment on the treatment because, well, first of all, remember, they knew we were coming, right? So, I mean, Greg notified them, weeks ago that we were coming. So, I don't want to be critical of them, but, they have plenty of time if there were any problems to fix them. So for me to comment on the conditions when they had weeks notice about, Well, I mean, it's stark. I mean, they're laying on, they don't have separate dormitory rooms. They're in maybe 5 or 6 different rooms, and they have a cot, and they're all together, and
Did they say they were sick? And they weren't taking care of them?
we had a couple people. We had a couple of people that had health problems, and we had the people from the public health service that we asked to attend to them. But I really don't want to emphasize that, because if somebody was in charge and they had 3 or 4 weeks notice before we came, I don't know how relevant it is to look at the conditions. I want to emphasize the fact that this president and his administration are making it virtually impossible for people to seek political asylum. These people who are in this detention center, they're not coming here for economic reasons. They're being persecuted, they're being treated violently, the women are having domestic problems, a lot of them are being persecuted for religious reasons, or sometimes, or more often, because they don't agree with the government. And you can't have a situation where Trump says, oh, if you're in Guatemala, for example, you got to report yourself to the Guatemala authorities. You just can't present yourself to the border. You got to make your case before you leave Guatemala. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, I'm just using Guatemala as an example, but I can't go to the authorities in a country that's persecuting me and say, oh, you're persecuting me, so I want to seek political asylum in the U.S. That's not going to happen. So that's the main thing. That's my main takeaway. Okay. Are you next?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think there'll be opportunity to answer questions once Adriano Espaillat has concluded his remarks. I'm Hakeem Jeffries. I represent the 8th Congressional District in Brooklyn and Queens. Let me first just thank Greg Meeks for the opportunity to convene us here today to visit this facility. You know, the House of Representatives is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for the so-called president, we work for the American people. So we have a separate and co-equal responsibility to act as a check and balance on an out-of-control administration. That is why we are here today, because we clearly have a broken immigration system that has been exacerbated by 3 factors. 1, a broken process. 2, a xenophobic policy. 3, an out-of-control president. As Chairman Pallone indicated, from my experience, and I've been on the border in El Paso, I've been to Ciudad Juarez to visit individuals who were forced to wait in Mexico as a part of a new policy that the Trump administration has enacted. Several of us visited this particular facility on Father's Day last month. The big challenge that we confront right now is that the Trump administration is intentionally undermining our nation's asylum laws. Under our current laws, individuals have an opportunity to claim credible fear of persecution from their country of origin. That is not something that is made up. That is a law in the United States of America. And what is happening under this administration, and we spoke to several people who fall into this category, is that they are fleeing persecution from their home countries, many of which are in the Central American Northern Triangle region of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, presenting themselves voluntarily at the U.S.-Mexico border and then being detained and treated like criminals, as opposed to being put through a dignified process consistent with the laws that are on the books in the United States of America. That's un-American, that's unconscionable, that's unacceptable, and we're going to make sure that we do everything in our power to change it. In addition to meeting with asylum applicants, as Greg pointed out, from all over the world, many of whom were from Latin America, but from all over the world, there were also some individuals who we talked to who had been in the country for years, one of whom was a legal permanent resident with a green card, who apparently had a misdemeanor conviction, which the administration claims is a crime of moral turpitude. The president engages in moral turpitude each and every day of the week that he's been in office. But there's an individual who had a misdemeanor conviction 15 years ago, whose daughter is a member of the Air Force, whose entire family are U.S. citizens, who's at risk of being deported. A Caribbean American woman. And this is part of the xenophobic process to try and whitewash the United States of America. That's problematic, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it.
Thank you, Congressman Meeks, Pallone, Chairman Jeffries, for leading this trip. This is my second time here. I've been to now 5 facilities throughout the country. We came last time here on Father's Day to meet with fathers that have been separated from their children. Just last week, I was at a courtroom in the Varick Street building, federal building, to support a mom that had been arrested on DWI. 4 children. She went into rehab, and just a week before she completed rehab, ICE went in there and arrested her. And we were able to avert her deportation last week. I think the judge was moved by the presence of her 4 children. One of them who had attempted suicide while the mom was in jail. And so the first thing that I get out of this visit is, first and foremost, is that these folks here are not rapists and are not criminal, like the president said. These were not rapists. These were not criminal. There were folks that were fleeing violence. We met a young woman that said she was being extorted. She was a small businesswoman, had a travel agency in her town, and was being extorted by some groups there. We met a young man who said that he was fleeing for religious persecution. We met others that were fleeing violence. One woman was organizing women in her country against domestic violence and felt that she was being pressured to leave. So these folks are seeking asylum, and that has been the tradition of this nation for many, many years. And the problem is that the asylum process has been overextended to guarantee almost deportation. So that must be reformed immediately. The courts are kangaroo courts. They should be totally independent, transparent. They should not be administrative courts that make their decisions from an insular perspective with very little transparency. They should be a court like any other court. Immigration court should be an independent court. And of course, I think that the translation services could be much better. They have automated phone translation services. I think they need to have translators, particularly for the main languages, right here on site. And the food services, of course, let a lot to be desired. But again, these are people seeking asylum. Our nation is built on an arc of justice that says that if you're seeking asylum anywhere in the world, and there were people from all over the world there, then we are generous enough, we're open enough to let you in, and then you make your case. These people are put in jail and put under very adverse condition and treated like criminals. I think that's horrendous. I think that's an indictment against our country. And of course, we need to do better. And so again, I believe that the courts should be independent so these folks have a shot. They don't understand. Each and every one of their cases is very different and complicated, and they don't understand the rule of law. They don't understand the legalese that they have to navigate through to go to a court and eventually meet their families. Most of them, by the way, have family members awaiting them right here. And so the courts have to be independent, and they should have a shot at being released at the court. It should be a swift process where the asylum petition is taken seriously. I think the conditions could be better. This is a jailhouse. This is not a suite. If you ask me what it is, it's a jailhouse, right? It's not the presidential suite at the Hyatt or some other hotel. And so we're here to support them. We will continue to support them, and we will continue to keep the administration accountable. En español, por favor. Estamos aquí para apoyar a estas personas. La gran mayoría son personas que buscan asilo político. No son criminales ni violadores, como dice el presidente. Son personas que tienen familiares que lo están esperando, que le están huyendo a la violencia. Vienen de toda parte del mundo y buscan realmente reunificarse con sus familias y huirle a la muerte, a la violencia. Entonces, estos casos de asilo toman mucho tiempo. Las cortes son realmente como una corte de canguro donde ya están predestinados a ser deportados. Las cortes de inmigración deben de ser independientes. Deben de ser independientes. Y por eso estamos aquí, para apoyarlo a ellos. Ellos no son criminales. Ellos no son violadores, como dice el presidente. Ellos son seres humanos que tienen su familia, que sufren como cualquiera de nosotros y merecen tener su día en la corte.
So, let me just say one other thing. We'll take in questions. Number one, when I looked at the number of Venezuelans in the facility, I happened to have visited previously the border of Venezuela and Colombia. And to see the difference on how the Colombians, during a crisis in Venezuela, were accepting the Colombians who were coming in and trying to escape because of what's taking place in Venezuela. They were welcoming them. They had food for them at the border. They were trying to make sure they took care of them, in contrast to what's happening here in the United States. And lastly, we were also told inside that the vast difference between the policies that took place with President Obama and the policies currently being instituted by this president is that under Obama, the focus was solely on those who were here that had committed violent felonies. That under this administration, that has shifted to not only those that have committed violent felonies, but those who might just be around or in the neighborhood. They would sweep everybody up, whether or not they've been committed a minor offense or had overstayed their green card. Everybody was now being swept up by the policies of this administration. That's not who we are. Questions?
On the Flores decision, while you guys were inside, the acting DHS secretary said that the reason why they're moving to do away with the Flores decision is because no child should be a pawn in the immigration fight, and he said it's also to try to restore integrity. Your reaction to what the Trump administration and DHS are doing on this?
My first reaction, if you really want to restore integrity, what you need to do is to hire more judges and have cases adjudicated in a much more timely fashion and not keep people. You know, I'm told that some folks are held over a year just to get before a judge. So if you want to talk about trying to do something on a humanitarian basis, you should make sure there's more judges to adjudicate. You should also make sure that where individuals have family members, because every statistic that I've seen show that individuals, particularly those that are seeking asylum, return to court so that they can have their cases heard, even those that sometimes have ankle bracelets. So I say to the president and his people, what we can do is to put more judges, hire more judges, and have more cases adjudicated in a much more timely fashion. But to incarcerate children for eternity almost, for over 100 days, etc., does not make it humane. In fact, it keeps children in inhumane conditions, and something that we shouldn't stand for.
What are you doing to shut this place down and free these people?
Media, please.
Media, please.
What are you doing
Media,
to
please.
shut this place down?
We're going to do the
Media,
media.
please.
There are 3 other ICE detention facilities in New Jersey at the county jails. They're much larger than this one. They also have asylum seekers. They also have people who are separated from their children at the border, and the conditions have been criticized. In Essex, the DHS Inspector General said the conditions there were deplorable. I was wondering if the gentleman will be visiting those facilities, and if you think the Democrats that run those county jails, they're all run by Democrats, and they have these ICE contracts. Do you think those Democrats should end their contracts with those jails?
Look, I can't, I shouldn't say I can, or I don't feel it's appropriate for me to comment on the conditions in the jails, because again, when we came here today, they have plenty of time to fix the conditions if there were any bad conditions. So I really can't comment on that. But I did want to say on Flores,
What about the county? What's it look like now?
let me just say this about the Flores. The one thing, if I could just add something about what Greg said, you know, the problem with the overturning Flores is that if you don't have an opportunity to go before a judge, you could sit here, you know, in this case, a family could sit, you know, Flores says 20 days. You could sit here indefinitely, right? Because the bottom line is that when they decide who they're going to release, usually, as they explained to us today here, people only get released or go out on bond if they have some kind of ties, right? In other words, if they can show that they have a sister or someone else, or they have a job or something, then maybe the judge will let them post bond, or they'll be released at the discretion of the facility manager. But if you have no ties or anything, then you know, that family or kids could sit there in the detention center for months or years. So that's why the Flores decision shouldn't be overturned, because it requires that after 20 days you have to, you know, you can't stay more than 20 days. So when HHS says, "Oh, we got to keep people here," they could be kept there indefinitely.
That's the bottom line, man.
And
we all know what you're telling us.
Well,
that's why we're here, because we understand everything.
Questions? Any more questions?
That's why we're here. Because we know this is criminal. This is criminal.
You say no, they will be here indefinitely.
What are you doing to shut this place down and free these people?
The press.
What are you doing?
All right. You have a question? One last question. Vamos ahora.
Yes.
You are normalizing this. You are normalizing this.
You're elected. We can't stand it.
Get out of that business, sir. I hope you can hear me.
No,
I can't.
Calm down anymore. Because these kids are dying in there. These people choking in there. They didn't do a goddamn thing. They're innocent. They're innocent people. Some nothing.
Yes.
Some nothing. And you press that stuff the fuck
Well,
up.
number one,
You want to press? Step up, press. How long will it take to hire judges? Step up.
number one, what we will do. Number one, that's a case that has to be argued in court to show, because Flores is the law. It's made, and it's a precedent that was set by a court. And so I can assure you that the Congress, along with other legal, not-for-profit organizations, will fight in the courts to make sure that Flores is upheld as it should be. Because here again is an act that is being put forward by this president that's unprecedented, that's trying to go beyond what the law says. And so we will continue to fight and make sure that we have advocates fighting against what this president is trying to do.
I had to say, Greg, I had something.
Yo, yeah.
Let me simply say, there is not a single member of Congress on the Democratic side who is normalizing anything. None of the 4 members of Congress who are here represent this particular congressional district. Not one of us. I represent a district in Brooklyn and Queens. I'm not going to be lectured. We're not going to be lectured to by people who we don't serve. The people who we serve, the people who we serve, the people who we serve have given us the opportunity to leave the districts that we represent because they understand this is abnormal times and that it's important for every single member of Congress, particularly on the Democratic side, as we have been doing, whether it was the Muslim ban, whether it was family separation when we were here on Father's Day, whether it's the border visits that we've done, whether it's the marches that we participated in, whether it's the 35-day government shutdown where we refused to allocate a dime to the president to build his reckless and medieval border wall. We understand the stakes, and we're going to continue to fight and do everything we can legislatively to turn things around. But at the same token, this is an existential political fight that is going to involve.
You got to get the Republicans that are on the fence on your side. They're only doing it for the money, and you guys got to pull them on your side of the fence.
It's an
That's the bottom line. And the press got to follow, and we need a peaceful revolution in this country.
Thank you, sir. It's an existential political fight as well. That's going to require the American people to eventually decide what direction do we want to go in November of 2020. And we're going to do everything possible to make sure that we move the country in a better direction, which is going to involve firing the Senate majority and, of course, firing the President of the United States.
Thank you.
Everybody has a role. Everybody has a role. So those of you and those of us who have friends in states where there are Republican members of Congress or senators where they're Republicans, we need to go together in those areas because that's where the focus should be. With that, let me say thank you to everybody for being here, and we'll take private questions. Well, I think that you won't have any problems with Democrats who are looking and want to change immigration laws, but you have to have the votes to get it done. We are passing bills on the House side on a continuous basis that dies in the graveyard of Senator McConnell. So what 2020 is all about is making sure that we reverse and change that. So the bills that we pass on the House, and I can tell you there's a bunch of them in the 200 days that we've been in charge that are just dying in the Senate. So there's enough room for all of us to be activists, but to make sure that those just look at the voting records, that are not voting the way that we think that Americans want to show themselves, that we vote and make that difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Great. Time to see you. Thanks a lot.
Yes.